It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher in the Los Angeles area. This is my 17th year in the classroom, and this, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. Jeff, guess what?
I don't know.
You gotta guess, man. You gotta guess. I got some good news, man. I got some good news about our show, man.
I'm gonna keep it real 1980s on you, man, and say chicken butt.
I was hoping you would say that because that always is an acceptable answer. But
Yes.
now, man, we have crossed the threshold of 500 YouTube subscribers. 500,
right.
man. I remember when we were struggling to get that first 20, 25, trying to get to 100. And here we are with over 500 YouTube subscribers. So we want to shout all of you out, all of you who are watching us on YouTube. Big shout out to you. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. And those of you who are listening on the go, we appreciate you. We definitely want to encourage you to, if you enjoy what you hear and enjoy these conversations that we have on the show, we want to encourage you to go ahead and give us that 5-star review. It would go a long way towards helping us expand the show and get out to new listeners. All right. So, yeah, man, Jeff, I'm feeling good about crossing that 500. And I know this episode right here is going to be a dope one because, for one, they're all dope. But we just had a fantastic episode with Dr. Goldie Muhammad. And we just been really on a streak with just real heavy hitters in the world of education, really dope, transformative folks. And I'm willing to bet that we probably have another super dope guest today. So, Jeff, can you tell us what is on today's agenda?
Well, Manuel, you would be correct. Our streak is alive and well. Nothing but the dopest of the dope guests joining us here on All the Above. And today we have someone who, on a personal level, I'm very excited about. I think she's a fascinating personality, fascinating figure in education, and also someone that you and I have a little bit of a connection with because she is currently the director of the teacher education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is, of course, the alma mater of the two of us. So, it's even in some ways a little bit of a reunion to, circle back, go, approaching 20 years later,
Jeff, you're old.
Yeah, right. I think there's a we that you meant to put at the front of that statement, Manuel. But we have none other than Dr. Cristina Villarreal. You may know her as V or Dr. V. And in addition to being the director of the teacher ed program at Harvard, she is also an educator with a long history as a social studies teacher coming out of Oakland. She, as a professor, teaches ethnic studies to educators. And so we're going to kind of dig into these issues around what the role of ethnic studies is in preparing the next generation of educators, both classroom teachers and also folks who work in other aspects of education or who are preparing to be school leaders. So it's going to be a real fascinating conversation, and you definitely don't want to miss it.
Dope. Harvard in the house. That's how you got to say it.
You got to put the pinky out when you say it, man.
Harvard, yes. All right, folks. But up first, of course, we're going to take a look at recent headlines in the world of education in a segment that we call the Do Now. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks for watching All the Above. We really appreciate you, and we need your help. We're trying to get the word out about All the Above to everyone. Here's what you can do. Go to aotashow.com. That's our website. All the links to all of our content is there. You can share our stuff on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. Send the links to friends, colleagues, educators you know who could benefit from this type of show. Help us spread the word about All the Above. Thanks. Enjoy the show.
All right, folks, now it's time for today's Do Now. Let's take a look at some recent headlines in the world of education. Jeff, how are we doing the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, we today are going to be taking some attendance. We're going to see who's in the house here with us on all the above today. So we got
Yeah.
a roll call.
Roll call. All right. Let's see who's in the house for today's episode. All right, Jeff. First name on the attendance is Butte County.
Interesting. Not a name that you hear, on a regular basis. People in California hear about like Orange County and LA County and that kind of thing, right? So Butte County, I know it's just like it's in the sticks, man. That's all I know. It's deep
In the sticks.
deep in the
Yes.
woods, up north somewhere. Pardon my geographical ignorance about the counties of California.
Yes. I mean, I suppose anything north of Sacramento, I guess, could be considered more or less in the sticks to be geographically accurate, I suppose. All right, so Butte County is in our report today because Butte County was identified as one of several counties in California that are currently experiencing a really high and unfortunate and really shocking level of homelessness amongst its student population. All right, and this is according to a new report out of UCLA. So let's get into the details. So this new research compiled by UCLA's Center for the Transformation of Schools shows that the number of students across California who are currently experiencing homelessness has risen by nearly 50% in the last decade. Now, this data specifically looks at the 2018 to 2019 school year. And during that time, 269,000 K-12 students experienced homelessness. In higher ed, 1 in 5 community college students, 1 in 10 Cal State University students, and 1 in 20 University of California students experienced homelessness during that school year. These numbers are likely higher today, of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the authors of this report, which is called State of Crisis, Dismantling Student Homelessness in California, also included a list of supports that districts could consider in order to help students who might be experiencing homelessness. So, Jeff, what do you think about these new numbers? It's really shocking, I think.
It is shocking. It is alarming. It is concerning. Whatever adjective that says like, what the hell is going on? It is that, right? Here we are in the United States of America, the wealthiest country, most well-resourced country in the world. Here we are in California, the largest, most populous, and most wealthy state in that country. And yet we have a booming crisis of students experiencing homelessness, not only, of course, in our K-12 schools, but in, our students who are in college, right? So, this is just, it's crazy, right? And I think, Manuel, that there are, and, I'm glad this piece was produced. I'm glad they have some suggestions about what schools can do to serve the needs of students who are experiencing homelessness. But I'm going to actually take a slightly different angle on this story because I think in as much as it's important that we have this data and we do think about what schools can do, I think honestly we ask schools to do too much. And this is a perfect encapsulation of one of the ways in which we ask schools to just do things that like aren't or shouldn't at least be the kind of purview of a school, of an educational institution, right? As a society, why do we have so many people who are experiencing homelessness? And it's not the job of schools to fix that problem, right? So I'm going to share with folks here, there was a definition of homelessness that this study used, right? And it included things like kids who are sharing housing with people due to a loss of housing or economic hardship. Folks living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, shelters, folks who have a primary nighttime residence that is not a place where people normally usually sleep, people living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, train stations, etc., and migratory children who qualify as homeless because they are children who are living in, in similar circumstances. Now, those are conditions, economic conditions for kids and families and for college students that should not be allowed to exist in the wealthiest country in the world. So I know that in our country, because of federal legislation and things, we put on schools the work of helping to address this problem, but it is fundamentally not the work of school to fix homelessness. It is the work of society. It's the work of legislatures, of executives, governors and presidents to fix homelessness. Banks even, need to play a role here. So I'm outraged, I'm shocked, and I'm like, schools, this is not a school problem. It becomes a school problem because we've made it that way. But schools are not in the business of making sure everybody has a house to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I certainly agree with all of that. And as a teacher, I mean, it's an important reminder to me that you never quite know which of your students might be unhoused or might be really experiencing a living situation in which, like, they don't know where they're going to go to sleep that night, or they're sleeping on the couch of a friend's home because their family got displaced from their own apartment or their own home. And it's an important reminder that as a teacher, you never quite know what your students are going through. And the report includes several suggestions for how schools and districts can try to help students who might be experiencing homelessness. And some of those suggestions are things that, as a teacher, I know I'm supposed to do all the time, but it's like even more important to think about it now during this pandemic. And, some of those suggestions included differentiated and flexible instruction. And to me, this reminds me of the sort of ongoing discussion that I've seen among teachers about whether or not cameras should be on or off during distance learning. Like, this is a reminder, like, please do not require your students to turn their cameras on, because you do not know what situation they're in, and they don't necessarily want all their classmates to see that and to know that. The report also mentions that there needs to be greater coordination between schools and in local services, county services, and social work services, and all of that, because to your point, Jeff, it's not up to schools to solve homelessness, for sure. And we definitely want to do the best that we can to support students, but school cannot do it alone, for sure. So the report definitely recommends more coordination between various services. The report also reminds us to create safe and supportive learning environments that allow students to feel supported and allow for creative, flexible interactions that might not necessarily require a live face-to-face in all cases. And of course, during this pandemic, I mean, a lot of students, even though we definitely don't want to rush students back to school because of obviously the challenge in doing that and the lack of safety precautions that most schools have right now, but still for a lot of students, school was a bit of stability for them. And without them showing up to school each day, it's even harder to make sure that each student is doing okay. All right. So for me, this is a reminder that I got to do above and beyond just teaching my content. I definitely can't demand students to meet with me at a set time and have their camera on and follow these rules and get this in by this deadline, because I don't know what students are going through. Butte County, this is not an area, that's one of the counties identified in the report. Butte County is not what I would think about when I think about high levels of unhoused kids. I would, assume like big cities, because you hear about San Francisco and Los Angeles and just crazy housing costs. Butte County isn't one of the areas that you would commonly associate with those sorts of issues. So this goes above and beyond, I think, just the general discussion that we had about homelessness. I think this is really a moment to stop and reflect and really think, as a teacher, how are you supporting students who you may or may not realize are sleeping in a car each night?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Manuel, because, I don't want my previous comments to be misconstrued to say that, like, well, because homelessness is a problem where the solution lies outside of school, that therefore school has no role and responsibility to help support students who are experiencing homelessness. And I definitely agree with that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I just think we also, honestly, I think as educators need to push back a little bit, frankly, because, we have like the McKinney-Vento federal legislation is probably the biggest, piece of legislation that kind of governs how schools track and interact and support with students who are experiencing homelessness. But the reality is, like, we should push back and say, look, we have a problem with folks who are homeless. The problem is not those people, and the problem is not school isn't doing enough. The problem is that housing is too expensive. The problem is that we have people struggling with chemical dependency and not enough, supports and services. The problem is banks are doing predatory things, right? Like, we need to put our societal energy at addressing the causes of homelessness so that students don't come to school experiencing homelessness, right? Like, that should be taken off the plate as an issue that educators have to deal with. We have enough to deal with, right? With students' learning needs, with students' social emotional needs, with students' developmental, needs, right? With English learners and students who have IEPs and all kinds of things that are definitely the purview of school, right? We don't need society heaping more on the table. So I'm glad we have this data. Let's get to work on solutions, and let's stop asking schools to be a Band-Aid on massive social problems that aren't rooted in school.
Yeah, all of that. And for sure, even though this report focuses on California, this is definitely not a problem that's unique to California. And I know California gets dumped on a lot in conservative media as some sort of wasteland, which it obviously is not.
Anarchist district is the term you're looking for.
Yeah, just and also I want to point our viewers, our listeners to previous episodes that we've had where this issue has come up some. One was the episode about supporting our LGBTQ plus youth, and there's definitely a lot of students who more or less are disowned or marginalized from their own families because of their sexual orientation. And some of those, many of those end up unhoused. And we also had an episode about supporting our foster youth. A lot of foster youth, when they age out of the system or because of the particular circumstances of their placements, a lot of foster youth find themselves in a position where they are unhoused and they experience homelessness. So we had some pretty dope guests talking about those issues for sure. And also, the story lastly reminds me of a student that I had who went off to college, and for matters pertaining to that student's own family circumstance, that student ended up not able to live with their family anymore. And that student, during that transition from high school to college, was staying with a friend, and thankfully the college that the student ended up at had all these services for students who were unhoused. So I definitely, I don't think all colleges have that, but I definitely think that we gotta, at the higher ed level, make sure that we are fully investing resources into student housing and helping students out who might not have families to go home to during those breaks where folks aren't supposed to be living in the dorms anymore. So yeah. All right. Sad stuff, Jeff. Let's get a uplifting story. All right. What's next on the roll call?
Oh, man. Well, you always do this to me, man.
What? Ask for uplifting news? I mean, come on now. Like, how difficult can that be? It's 2020. There's got to be plenty of great stories out there.
It's 2020. There has not been uplifting news in the 5 years that have taken place since January of 2020. So our next roll call, Manuel, just to this is uplifting depending on how you look at it, like in a tragic, horrible, evil kind of way. Our next roll call for you, Manuel, just for you, is Candace Owens.
Whoa, Jeff. We don't need to say that name on the show, man. We just crossed 500 YouTube subscribers, and that's a name, man, that I don't want the algorithms to pick up that name, because then we're going to get a lot of conservative trolls landing on this video, and we'll get all those thumbs downs and trolling in the comments. Yeah, let's avoid that name if we can. Please, Jeff.
Yeah,
although not everybody knows who that is.
Yeah, not everyone does know who that is, and if you don't, then bless you. I mean, what a wonderful existence that must be. She is, she's the female Uncle Tom in chief, I guess you might say. I don't know what the woman equivalent of an Uncle Tom is, but it's a Candace Owens. So So here we go. This story comes to us by some good reporting by Rebecca Klein in the Huffington Post about an Ohio public school that has been giving students extra credit for watching videos from the right-wing website PragerU, which produces content discussing conservative viewpoints. A 10th grade history class at Maumee High School was assigned to watch a series of PragerU videos and answer questions about the videos, quote, most important messages. These PragerU videos had titles such as Build the Wall, Why the Right Was Right, and The Left Ruins Everything. The teacher's class website shows that she also assigned these videos last year. Now, PragerU has been trying to gain further influence in K-12 classrooms. Last month, the organization launched an online learning program directly aimed at parents and educators, complete with study guides and sections such as Conservatives Are the Real Environmentalists and The Ferguson Lie. This particular Ohio homework assignment appeared unrelated to PragerU's latest venture, which of course is called PrEP, PragerU Resources for Educators and Parents, which launched several weeks ago. Now, PragerU has a number of well-known right-wing personalities who are behind its content. Candace Owens, of course, being one of them, but there's other names you may know, like Ben Shapiro and Adam Carolla, and now I'm forgetting his name. I think his name is Bob Rowe, the guy from the Dirty Jobs TV show. So there are some pretty well-known personalities there who will participate in producing this content. It's a very clear attempt to, spread influence in our K-12 schools. Manuel, what do you have to say about this?
Well, all right, so plenty, but we'll just start with the fact that if anybody's not familiar, these are big time conservative, I guess you could say, talking heads, which is obviously a very common content format. And Miss Owens, she gained some notoriety over the summer for producing a video about George Floyd, about the person George Floyd, and basically how he wasn't a great person, and this is all overblown. And that video was the most watched video on Facebook for a significant period of time. So just slamming this man who was just brutally murdered in front of our own eyes. That's the type of stuff you get from these right-wing talking heads. And I wish we could all agree that that sort of material has no place in the K-12 classroom. Now, PragerU, that's a misleading name. It's not a university. I mean, the U stands for university, but it's not a university. So anybody out there that's, visualizing some sort of conservative school somewhere, it's not a school. It's just a website that produces videos and content. And I'm sure, and this is where I worry, Jeff. I'm sure there are many people out there, educators included, who are wondering, how is this any different from having the 1619 Project as curriculum? Or how is this any different from a teacher wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt? My fear is that we will both sides this to the point where all curriculum is accepted in some kind of way because it's just an alternative view on the stuff that the folks on the left are bringing in. And it's not that. These are not two of the same thing. I mean, going all the way back to the president's comments after Charlottesville and, wonderful people on both sides or whatever he said, this both sides stuff is really, really, really dangerous because there aren't both sides of an issue when it comes to humanization, when it comes to uplifting folks who have been marginalized and oppressed for centuries. And this teacher, I don't know the specifics about this teacher and this teacher's curriculum choice. At first I was kind of like, well, maybe it's part of an assignment where they were supposed to interrogate these videos and point out the different propaganda elements of the video. But based on the article by Rebecca Klein, and shout out Rebecca Klein, it sounds like it was more of a, watch these videos and write about the central messages of these videos as if these messages are okay or sound in any kind of way. So I'm really worried that as curriculum becomes more of a focus for families across the nation, in part because of distance learning and more families being able to see and hear curriculum more than ever before, and in part because of these attacks from the president and others on certain curriculum, I feel like curriculum is becoming so politicized. I mean, it's obviously always been political. I mean, the decision of what to include and what not to include has always been political. But I feel like the level of partisanship around deciding what curriculum belongs in schools, I feel like we've reached a new peak in that debate. And I'm really worried that educators out there are, if they see an educator using the 1619 project, there's probably another educator thinking like, well, I choose to use PragerU content and it's on the same level. It's just a different lens or different perspective.
Yeah.
And so much more than just a different lens issue. I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm gonna like push it even a step further, Manuel, because, well, first of all, actually, let me correct what I said earlier. The guy from the Dirty Jobs TV show, his name is Mike Rowe. So sorry for my misstatement. And of course, they also include among their ranks America's favorite racist in a bow tie, none other than Tucker Carlson. So. Well, I think the issue here is not only that they're going to both sides, they're like, well, we have the 1619 project, and that's like liberal communist propaganda. So we have patriotic propaganda, or whatever ridiculous name they're going to give it. I think there's 100% guarantee that they're going to attempt that, right? And that they're going to go even further to push out of the curriculum and push out of discourse in schools things like critical, content and teaching that is rooted in critical race theory, right? Or in the kind of moral philosophy and principles of social justice, right? For one that is rooted in this just pure mythology of American exceptionalism and white supremacy. And, the reality is that's what these folks are up to, right? Now, as a social studies teacher, I don't actually have a problem with using propaganda from any perspective, from right wing or left wing or, centrist, whatever perspective, as a tool for instruction, right? Now, there's a very clear ethical, responsible manner in which propaganda needs to be used and needs to be presented to students so that they can consider it critically, so that you're not just giving them content that in effect is propagandizing and potentially radicalizing them, right, to any particular viewpoint, but using it as an artifact of like, here's one perspective and, we need to understand it in the context of history and facts, right? I don't have a problem with, but that's not what these folks are trying to do, right? Like, these folks are trying to shift the curriculum to be their right-wing propaganda, to tell, just straight up, in some cases, lies, or to advance their political position. And I think at the end of the day, I've said this a bunch of times on the show, and I'm gonna keep saying it over time. And well, there is something about the fundamental values of school that is rooted in some type of social justice, right? They're like, everyone here should be treated equally. Everyone should have equal opportunity and access to learning. Everyone should be supported and welcomed, no matter what your identity is, or no matter what group you come from in society that, may be marginalized. You have a home and you have a right to safe space in our institutions of public education. And the fact of the matter is, the philosophy that these folks are pushing doesn't believe that, right? Like, it's just at odds with that basic principle, right? It's rooted in patriarchy, it's rooted in white supremacy, and those are oppressive constructs. So there is something, if you want to debate libertarian economic policy and you think that's going to, to actually produce better societal outcomes for everyone, like, we can have that conversation. But if your issue is to build a wall, right, and denigrate, Latinx immigrants, right? Like, that's just racist, right? Like, and we can't support that as, as a good thing in school.
Yeah, something that our guest last episode, Dr. Goldie Muhammad, said in that discussion is that, this isn't a political agenda. This is a human agenda to center and uplift folks, especially Black and brown students, especially folks from marginalized backgrounds. And, that's a fear that I have, is that this is all just going to be thrown into a giant category of political curriculum, and some districts, in order to avoid any controversy at all, might just say, like, all of it is out. 1619 is out and PragerU is out. There we're being fair and neutral. We're just throwing it all out. When again, it's not an equal matter on it's not a matter of two different perspectives on something that's arguable. It's not that at all. But we might end up equating them the same just to avoid the controversy or to, yeah, for all that. But also it just reminds me that as a teacher, I have to be really careful. Like I have to be really careful in how I connect students to content. And the reason I say that is because, maybe this teacher, I don't know, maybe this teacher was just trying to figure out an assignment and thought it'd be cool and interactive for students to view these videos and write about these videos. And maybe that teacher's own independent bias made it so that this teacher didn't realize just how politicized these videos are. That's a giant problem. That's a giant problem. In fact, we'll talk about that with our guest today, Christina Villarreal, about ethnic studies and how it can help us see past these biases and see through white supremacy. But in any case, maybe the teacher thought like, oh, video assignment, students can watch these videos and write some stuff. And as a teacher, I have to be really careful because, the world is changing very quickly in terms of access to content. And one assignment that I had earlier this year, I was trying to connect some Enlightenment texts that students read, Rousseau and John Locke and, social contract theory with current modern day protests for racial justice. And, Trevor Noah had a really widely distributed video over the summer about the social contract and his views of folks who are out there protesting. And I wanted to include a series of videos, and this was around the time where Kirk Herbstreit, who's a big-time college football analyst guy, he cried on air in discussing the events of the summer. And, it's a college football show, and here's a college football commentator discussing the events of the summer, the uprising for social justice, and crying tears in his realization of just how much pain there is out there. And this is a guy who had previously criticized Colin Kaepernick and this and that. So this, for him, perhaps it was a bit of growth. I don't know. So in any case, I wanted students to watch that clip as well. There's a series of clips that I put together, just varying degrees of reaction to the summer's protests. And in searching for that clip, because I saw it on Twitter, and Twitter is blocked on most of our student devices. So I wanted to find it on YouTube, which is not blocked. And I just typed in his name, simple Kirk Herbstreit. And I did it in a separate browser, not logged in because I like to keep my own YouTube algorithm clear of like school stuff. So this was just a, not logged in, separate incognito browser so that hopefully, no cookies or nothing would influence the search results. And one of the results, so there was like 12 or so immediate results. One of them was the actual video of Kirk Herbstreit, and it was posted on ESPN's YouTube channel. And all of the other videos, all of them were political reactions to his video, and they were all right-wing political reactions. So, and most of them were by Black conservatives, not Candace Owens herself, but folks within that realm. And it was, titles like, oh, Kirk Herbstreit cries fake tears over fake Black oppression. Kirk Herbstreit's crying woke tears. And they were just totally just trying to emasculate him. It was just total garbage, total trash. And I thought to myself, man, I'm glad I didn't tell students just to go find that video, look it up and write about it. Because man, I would have led them right into this rabbit hole of right-wing toxic stuff. But yeah, all right, so that's it for today's stories. And we're gonna have a guest on today who's gonna bring some joy and help lift us, because those two stories are a little bit kind of downers. All right, so today's guest, Dr. V, she's just her passion for students and her passion for fighting the good fight is so inspiring. So I'm definitely looking forward to that seminar. That's up next. Stay tuned.
All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. We are thrilled to have you here with us today, and I am super excited because we have an amazing guest who's going to help us unpack some really interesting issues in our profession. Now, in recent episodes, we have been discussing issues of anti-racism in different content areas across the curriculum. So we've talked about science, we've talked about English, we've talked about math, and today, on just a personal level, we are happy to have with us a social studies teacher who teaches ethnic studies to graduate students, to students who are going to become the next generation of teachers. And we're going to be talking with her about the work of anti-racism as it applies in the higher ed context and as it applies to teacher education programs. So I want to welcome to All the Above Dr. Cristina Villarreal. She goes by V or Dr. V. Welcome to All the Above.
Hello. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. And let me tell you folks a little bit about Dr. V. Dr. Cristina Villarreal spent nearly a decade teaching and learning with the youth of East Oakland, where she taught middle school social studies and served as an assistant principal. Currently, she serves as the faculty director of the teacher education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she teaches ethnic studies and education courses to graduate students. She holds a BA in ethnic studies from UC Berkeley, a Master's of Education from Harvard, a Master's in Ethnic Studies from San Francisco State, and a Master of Philosophy and Education from Columbia, where she also got her PhD. Yes, I think that's 5 degrees. If we're counting, I might have even missed one in there. And her doctorate was in social studies education, of course, at Teachers College. Her research explores enactments of humanizing pedagogies, racial literacy, and racial healing, and radical healing, in secondary social studies classrooms through portraiture. So she is a fascinating person, a scholar and a teacher, and we are excited to have her here with us today. Welcome, Dr. V, to All the Above.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Dr. V in the building. Thank you so much for taking time out to be here on All the Above with us. And, obviously over the last 6 or so months, there's been this growing momentum towards decentering whiteness in education, in everything from the curriculum to teaching practices and teacher education. So we're wondering if we could start there and just ask you, what does it look like in your mind to decenter whiteness?
Thanks. So once again, thank you, Jeff and Manuel, for having me. We all graduated from the same program at HGSE, and so we have that connection plus all the West Coast connections. So it's just an honor to be here with you all, and hoping to also have a chance to connect with your guests and your audience following this episode, if possible. In terms of decentering whiteness, I think it's really important to name that it isn't a recent momentum that we're talking about. I would say maybe recently it's been picked up by mainstream outlets in a little in ways, because when we talk about decentering whiteness in the curriculum, Carter G. Woodson was very clear in his work to decenter whiteness, in the curriculum with the textbooks that he created, for instance. So in terms of just wanting to for me, I guess in the work that I'm doing, I definitely see it as one, I'm a grain of sand, in this many years, hundreds of years of struggles to decenter whiteness in education and curriculum, and that we've had the pendulum swing in terms of legislation. When we think about Brown v. Board, all of those things are really important. And so part of it is ensuring that there's opportunities to examine and interrogate those histories and how they have impacted what we see happening in classrooms. What it looks like is being clear about the frameworks that I'm using when I'm working with teachers, whether it's through teacher education or ongoing trainings. What are the books, that we're putting in front of them? Of course, every place I'm going to always plug this incredible text, this guide by one of our one of the most amazing North Stars of our time, Dr. Bettina Love. This is the first book that I put in the hands of every teacher on the first day of orientation for the teacher program in my first year in the role. And that it isn't something that lives in the mind, that you actually have to then do that work. And so it actually, for instance, as a director, it isn't just then in the curriculum, because I don't teach all of their classes. It means I'm intentional about who am I hiring, for instance, to supervise them and support them and mentor them in the field, to look into who have the mentors for this program historically been. Because that's going to matter if they're reading about and working to develop abolitionist curriculum and pedagogies, but they don't see that then being reflected in their schools. then are we actually then doing the work of decentering whiteness? So yeah, I think it needs to be like multi-pronged in terms of not just the readings or what we put on our syllabi, but to actually live and breathe that work in your everyday life, to walk the talk, right, so to speak. And that also looks like in admissions. Who are we recruiting? Who are we encouraging to be teachers? From where are we recruiting? Has Harvard historically been intentional about recruiting from HBCUs? For instance, in terms of who's going to be teachers in classrooms so that they actually reflect the young people that they're working with. So those are some ways. I don't know how long I should answer that question, because we could probably spend the whole episode talking about different ways to decenter whiteness, but those are some of the initial ways I think about.
Oh, fantastic. And for our listeners, anybody that's listening on the go, the book that she held up was We Want to Do More Than Survive by Dr. Bettina Love. And I guess a follow-up question for you to that work of decentering whiteness. A lot of our students are going to, regardless of what community they came from, a lot of them are going to end up either in predominantly white institutions or predominantly white corporate contexts and climates. So we're wondering, how do we really reconcile the work of decentering whiteness in the curriculum for our students, but also preparing them to survive and thrive in a world that still predominantly centers whiteness in the professional context and in the educational context?
Thank you for asking that, because that actually comes up obviously a lot, right? In the work that all of us do. I think it's really, really complex. There's not one way to do it well, especially when if you are committed to the work of dismantling these systems while you're simultaneously working within them. So I think first and foremost, it's important to be really clear always with your students. So this meant that when I would teach, right, when I was teaching 7th and 8th grade, I think early on in my teaching, I was very much like, oh, forget these tests are so biased and they're so stupid. But recognizing that as if I'm committed, right, to the work of justice, and that as long as those tests or exit exams, for instance, as long as they are still part of the system and pathways, and until we can get rid of them, then part of our work is to make sure that we're still preparing young people and or teachers, for instance, all the loopholes to become a teacher, to make sure that you are still, that they're still equipped to navigate the systems successfully, but not to do it without a critical consciousness and awareness about exactly what it is they're navigating and why. I think that that's like the important piece is having, being really clear and transparent about how problematic it is, naming that. What it looks like is, naming that, recognizing when you're dealing with something that is a clear manifestation and function of white supremacy, and that the work of being committed to dismantling it might mean that at times you are going to have to work within it. For instance, in teacher ed, this looks like the types of evaluations, right, that they're still held accountable for. We all went through, right, teacher programs, the DESE frameworks, and that sometimes things don't have to be all or nothing. That the ways in which we might evaluate those standards, you can do that through an abolitionist and culturally sustaining lens. So it's also right in the context and eye of the beholder, whoever's in that moment. Again, so that goes to why I'm intentional about who I hire to be those advisors, those field advisors, because they have to complete, right, that paperwork. But how that paperwork is completed, right? I think that's like an example of a more both and approach, and not, forget it. We're going to completely just ignore these systems, in which case none of my teachers would be certified. So it's a constant, I think, negotiation that requires us to be crystal clear, to have that political clarity about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it at any given moment, and that equipping teachers or young people with liberatory frameworks as they work to navigate and dismantle, and hopefully then thrive, not within the systems, but within what they create in their place, is the work that I hope to be engaged in.
Wow, it's so fascinating as I'm listening to you talk, Dr. V, is the kind of framing of that issue that you just named was really making me think about Lisa Delpit's work in a classic now in Other People's Children. And maybe you can write for us one day, other people's adult children who are in graduate school, and explore the language of power and the codes of power in the world of teacher ed. But really appreciate that framing there. And you are, I think at your core, an educator who grapples with issues of power and privilege in your pedagogy and in the content that you teach as someone who's taught ethnic studies to teacher education candidates and to graduate students of education in the nation's premier graduate school of ed. Although Manuel may beg to differ about that, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, what that experience is like teaching graduate students ethnic studies, and what you see as the role and the importance of ethnic studies in graduate schools of education who are cultivating the next generation of educators.
Wow. To teach, I would say that I don't take the tremendous honor and privilege of getting to teach and learn and live and love in ethnic studies for granted. Ethnic studies both, I think, saved, but also gave and breathed purpose into my life. And so to have a chance to either introduce or help students continue that journey on and with ethnic studies, again, it's a tremendous honor. That's how I describe the experience in terms of what it is like. Right now, there are 120 students enrolled in ethnic studies in education, the most we've ever had at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I teach 4 sections of it. It's incredible because the students this year, they're not just pre-service teachers. I have everyone from future principals, those that have been principals that are now becoming policymakers, doctoral students. We have a few undergrads this year, folks that are in the arts and education program who are looking to shake up the museum world. So it's less about curriculum. That becomes, for some of them, the ones that do want to take this back into actual pre-K to 12 classrooms, it looks a lot more like preparing folks to orient them to the world and the lens of ethnic studies. And so it's really focused on equipping them with a lens through which to view and then apply in their work. So the class begins with a comparative body-centered study of some key events in U.S. history through that counter-narrative lens, right, which is the orientation and the approach of ethnic studies, alongside a critical examination of our own biographies of education, and thinking about not just what we learned, but how we learned it, and then importantly, why we learned about histories in these ways. Because studying history and ethnic studies is very different. It is very intentional. We're very intentional about centering the lives, the brilliance, the resistance, the resilience, and the joy of communities of color, especially as we have resisted systems of oppression, privilege, and power over time. And that isn't present in most, not even just graduate schools, it's not present in schools. That type of history, right? That type of learning. And so to do that with adults, it's a trip. I get a lot of, how come I never learned this? And I don't have an answer. I'm like, you should be able to, this class is designed for you to start to answer that question. Why? Why do you think you didn't learn this? Why were you just writing down dates or answering questions? Why was your AP history class like this? And then importantly, to not stop there. Great. Now you're asking these questions. What does it compel you to do? And so that's once we're literally in the middle of pivoting, and we're now looking at the implications of racialization and racial formation theory, and looking at, well, what has that done for myself, right, in my own body, and the intergenerational trauma that I might be carrying, and how I navigate these, whether it's classrooms with young people who are also racialized beings, to begin then to look at how can ethnic studies then frameworks and approaches. So another book to plug. We use this text to really think about how might I transform the curriculum, the pedagogy, and the practices to enact, right, ethnic studies frameworks in my classroom or in my work as a school leader. And then we move from that. We look at case studies, so many of which are right there where you all are in LA. And like we look at the work, the incredible work that's been done at Roosevelt. And we also look at examples of curriculum from Oakland, California, from Tucson, Arizona. And then I push students to think about, you're not going to just take, right? You can't just lift what Leona and Roxy are doing in their classrooms, because that's not, unless that's where you are, unless you are living in Boyle Heights, right? Or in East Oakland. You need to look at, what does this look like in East Boston? What does this look like in Birmingham, Alabama? And that's, I think, the gift of this year is my students are literally all over the world on Zoom tuning in. And so as we are asking these questions, I'm pushing them to ask and apply in their very everyday context, whether it's with the children that they're raising or the children that they're teaching, or the adults that they're training and working with. What does this look like in your context? How has racialization played out? How does the history play out? Because if we look at, right, Leona Kwan's curriculum, and she has a unit on the role of, right, racialized hierarchies during the Gold Rush era. The Gold Rush, it's important, but it's not as relevant in say a Boston context. And so working with those incredible teachers and shouting out the Boston Teachers Union Ethnic Studies Now coalition that has been doing that work of building an incredible 9th grade curriculum that is so context specific. That's what it looks like, is me hopefully being a facilitator and guide towards activating the agency within all of these incredible educators, school leaders, policymakers, to think about, what does this look like for the specific places, the population with whom you are working and serving. And if it's ethnic studies, then it is explicit about decentering whiteness, about humanizing historically targeted, marginalized, and assaulted, right, populations. It is making sure that every move that you make is in those humanizing ways.
Nice. Now, there's a lot there that I definitely want to point out for folks who might be tuning in. And first of all, the book that Dr. V held up, Rethinking Ethnic Studies, available through Rethinking Schools. We'll link that below. And I think it's a book that is applicable to educators in all contexts, whether you teach ethnic studies or not. Lots of dope stuff in there for sure. And if you heard her mention Roxy and you're like, who's Roxy? That would be Roxana Duenas, one of our guests in our second ever All of the Above episode, which we might as well go ahead and link below this episode, because we explored ethnic studies and the work being done at Roosevelt High with Roxana Duenas, who's a super dope educator. For sure. Now, Dr. V, you've had a really fascinating journey, and to hear about the work that you're doing in teaching ethnic studies at the graduate level. You know, Jeff and I were both at that same university, Harvard Graduate School of Education, 1 year before you got there. And I got to say, I don't recall anything coming near that type of really critical work in terms of the offerings of courses at the time when I was there. But I do know that, the first time I saw your name anywhere, it was in an email that you sent when you were still at Berkeley, finishing up there and asking about the program, the teacher education program at Harvard. And now fast forward to today, you've gone to, teach in the, obviously you ended up getting your master's in teaching at Harvard, and you went back to the Bay and taught there and became an assistant principal and continued to study and eventually got your PhD at Columbia. And now here you are back at the Harvard Graduate School of Education as the director of teacher education. So, our listeners are in all different areas of their journey in education, from teaching to, whatever else they're doing as educators. So we're wondering if you could share with us a little bit about how has your journey through education impacted the work that you do today?
Oh, absolutely. Then, yeah, it would have to, I guess, start with being in my mommy's womb. That, right, being born a mixed race, right, a woman of color. I'm half Chinese, half Mexican, born in the Bay, the Gold Rush special, and and I think growing up and attending schools for the majority of my life where I did not see my history and the history of my ancestors reflected in the curriculum or in my teachers. And I think that's really right where maybe, I don't know, the questions or maybe the lack thereof, that thinking about that part of my biography heavily impacts my work because I ask teachers now to think about their own educational biographies. Who were their teachers? When and how? What are the ways in which their identities were affirmed or denied throughout their schooling experiences? So I think about my own journey in that way a lot of sometimes, which a lot of teachers do, right? We often think about what didn't we get in schools, right? You all named that, even like what I teach now. I very much describe the ethnic studies class like that. I say, I'm teaching the class I never got to take at the ed school. And oftentimes as teachers, we are trying to provide, even sometimes as parents, right? Trying to provide that which maybe we didn't get to have. And I think that's important to name. That informs both my own journey and what I'm trying to provide in the teacher program, in the ethnic studies classes, while also pushing teachers, school leaders to think about, how is what you're doing influenced by what you did or didn't get? And then it's also important to name when are those moments, those pivotal moments in your journey when when that fire was lit, when you began to feel affirmed and more human in your experiences. And for me, that was my 11th grade history class. Mr. Dwyer, who still teaches all the way up the coast from you all at Hayward High School, where I graduated from, class of 2 Gs. And that was the first time where I felt affirmed, right, and inspired, both by the curriculum, but also the type of teaching that I was experiencing. That was where I took my first ethnic studies class, was from Mr. Dwyer. And so that opened the doors, and that's ultimately why I then went in. It was the first time he photocopied pages from a different mirror. I remember seeing that, right, as an 11th grader, and then knowing, reading right then a history where I could place myself and my ancestors, and having a clarity about going into college and knowing I wanted to major in ethnic studies, and then having a chance to study under Ronald Takaki, and that heavily important. I mean, I held up the book because I'm holding up all the books that I'm teaching now in the ethnic studies class, because they have been instrumental parts of my journey. So I think majoring in ethnic studies for sure. I oftentimes say that, Mr. Dwyer helped to kind of open the door to the garden of ethnic studies, and I've never left. And so having a chance then, all the ways in which ethnic studies raised me from that moment, it literally informs every single move that I make in this work. And So it informs in terms of the content I teach, but also how I teach it. So everything from who is it that I work to center and uplift in the curriculum, but also just even in the pedagogy, even in how I facilitate the space of the classroom and whose voices that I work to even center again, not just in who I'm assigning on a syllabus, but also in who takes the class to ensure that it's a space where students can allow their full humanity to show up, because that's what ethnic studies taught me. And then I think that also informing the kind of teacher that I was, right, as a 7th and 8th grade teacher. And I say that part in terms of my journey, that the most important teachers that I actually had in terms of my own, like the development of my teacher core, my pedagogical core, the 7th and 8th graders that I worked with on 98th Avenue. And that's where I learned, I truly, I think, learned to be a teacher, and it continues to inform. There is no greater source. Nothing informs and inspires my work more than the young people that I worked with. I keep in touch with a lot of them. They're like in their 20s now. They're all grown up. They're having babies, and I think having a chance to continue to bear witness to their journeys, to be a part of their lives, and just check in and even ask them, for also advice. They gave me advice then as I was learning how to be a teacher, and they continue to inspire and inform my work now. That shows up heavily. And I often say that 7th grade was my absolute favorite grade to teach. And so if you come into my classroom now, which is all virtual these days, I'm doing a lot of what I did as a 7th and 8th grade teacher, and just enacting a lot of those structures, those practices, those activities. I'm just remixing them for a higher ed context, because especially as I'm preparing future middle and high school teachers, we often say to those teachers, like, don't ever assign something that you're not willing to do yourself. And so I think that being able to model it in those ways has also really informed the work that I do. And then I think maybe finally, I think my work as an assistant principal, if you look at kind of the timeline, the trajectory of my work, that you'll see that me being planted in classrooms is the most consistent, because I say it all the time, I'm the most alive when I'm in a classroom, whether it's as an actual teacher, as a coach, right? As a facilitator, all of those is where I feel the most alive. And I got to do some of that, but I think not enough of that as an assistant principal. And I remember missing it so much that I even taught a 12th grade ethnic studies class during 6th period. But it was actually my work. It was coaching as an assistant principal that inspired me to go into teacher ed. Because in talking to a lot of teachers and working with them, I became frustrated because I felt like I was arriving to the party late. I felt like they were coming into the castle unprepared, not unprepared in terms of their heart. They wanted to do the work, but the more I heard about their preparation programs and what they were and were not reading, it deeply concerned me. And I realized I got to get to them before I got to get to them before they get to the classrooms, before they come into our communities. So that is what propelled me to, when I talk to my my mentors, right? Dr. Sean Jinwright. He's like, well, V, you got to get a PhD. I was like, damn, I just want to teach. So that is what brought me then to the East Coast with all those pieces of the stories, with ethnic studies, with my own biography, with my own years of teaching in Oakland. I carry all that is literally with me all the time. I think a lot about Dr. Maya Angelou's quote, right? I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. It is running through my veins in every East Coast space that I've been through. The time that I spent in New York, then in Providence at Brown, and now at Harvard, that all of those parts of my journey show up, I think, very intensely in every single space that I walk or Zoom into. And I think that they just, I don't know, they show up in different ways depending on what I'm doing, whether I'm teaching or coaching or running a workshop. So those
Yeah.
are, yeah, those are some of the ways my journey shows up.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a beautiful telling of your story and your journey, and also a good segue into our final question here, which is, we're living in this time where everything in education feels like it's been turned upside down, and so many of the things that perhaps even months or weeks ago seemed impossible now are on the table, right? Or now are the norm for how we conduct our profession. And I'm wondering if you could share just some parting wisdom, some parting words of advice to the next generation of educators, or even perhaps the current educators, about how to kind of seize on this moment of transformation that we are all living through.
Thank you. I think first and foremost, I think it's so important to name and sit with and honor the very real fact that we are navigating a collective trauma. That I think is really important, because as we continue to push ourselves and to navigate this moment, that it is having an impact on our minds and our bodies and our hearts. And so I think that I'm hoping that part of this moment reminds us of the importance of centering healing in the everyday work of schools for ourselves, and especially for the young people that you might be working with. That will give me a chance to plug one more resource, another text that really informs, but that actually operates as very much a workbook with body-centered practices in terms of the racialized trauma that we are, right, collectively also experiencing, and to recognize that this is a moment where it's important to make sure that we're centering that, and to recognize how it's showing up in our bodies. How is white supremacy showing up in your bodies? When is it the voice of white supremacy that is often disguised as your voice, telling you what is or is not possible in this moment? I think that is very important. I think that we're offered an opportunity in this moment to really sit with that and look at what it compels us to do. The other piece that I want to name is that this is a moment to be very clear on what we refuse to go back to. I hear a lot of like, oh, well, when we go back to what? Because what it was before was hella problematic, and it wasn't in the best interest of us or the young people that we are here to serve. Period. The end. And so what can we use this moment to demand? Again, as I say that, I recognize that is dirty, messy, painful, difficult work, which is why, right, I started with making sure all this, as much as possible, is prepared for that struggle in our fight, because we are seeing so clearly the ways in which white supremacy is fighting hard to stay alive, to sink its teeth and claws into this moment, to stop opportunities to actually treat this moment as the portal, right, that Arundhati Roy has talked about. How can we actually manifest that and make it a reality? And it's never one person, right? It's each of us as individuals working in solidarity, because solidarity is a verb. And so what does it look like to exercise solidarity in this moment to ensure that what we can possibly create in place of what was before actually humanizes and honors the shared humanity of every single person in every space that we occupy, that we share, and that it's into, through, and beyond the curriculum, the pedagogy, the practices, the policies. And so that's what I'm saying. It's not going to be like just the teachers or just the leaders or just it's all of us working collectively and in solidarity. So that's one of my my hopes for this painful moment, this transition that we're all struggling and navigating through.
Yeah, well,
That's
thank
beautiful.
you so much, Dr. V, for joining us today. I think it's gonna, when we go back and watch this episode, I think there's so many gems in there. I know personally, at least, I'm gonna have to revisit and unpack. And just want to also give you a shout out for bringing your books with you today. I appreciate that. I think it's not only good reference material for folks out there watching and listening, but also I think speaks to you keeping your values close to you in the work. So I appreciate and respect that.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that about does it for this episode's seminar. Up next is our class dismissed. Stay tuned. What up, AOTA family? If you're not already following us on social media, man, what are you doing? We're available on Twitter at AOTA Show and on Facebook also at AOTA Show. And we've been putting up extras, including exit tickets. Exit tickets are short videos with our guests where we ask them about a few of their favorite things. Of course, we also put up links and articles and stories related to the world of education. So definitely, if you're not already, please consider following us on social media and spreading the word. Now back to the show.
All right, folks, we've come to that time in the episode that is our class dismissed. It's where we like to take just a couple minutes to give a shout out to someone or some entity out there doing great work in the field of education. Manuel, who we got today?
Man, we got a pretty dope story today, especially considering what we discussed during the Do Now about how many students are experiencing homelessness, and especially at the community college level, financial struggles are really, really tough on students. And this story pertains to a record-setting donation to California community colleges that we definitely want to discuss and shout out. So the J. Pritzker Foundation recently made an unprecedented donation, which is a 20-year, $100 million pledge to provide scholarships to California students facing unexpected financial hardships. This is the largest ever donation to a community college system in the whole country. And in the first year of this 20-year pledge, 34 community colleges in regions of California with the lowest percentages of adults who have attained any level of a college degree, those colleges will receive $150,000 each in this first year. And the president of the foundation, who's the president of the J. Pritzker Foundation, Dan Pritzker, says that he and his wife were really focused on improving education globally and were really inspired by President Obama's efforts to promote community colleges nationally. And the president of the Foundation of California Community Colleges, Keitha Mills, said the donation would help keep students enrolled by addressing the immediate financial needs that could prevent them from delaying their academic goals. So looks like some assistance is coming to these California community colleges that have students who are really struggling financially. And, $100 million, Jeff, that's pretty substantial, I think.
It's a lot of dough, man. Well, it's not change you find in the couch. Look, I think this is a good thing. The reality is our community colleges have not gotten the type of investment that they need in order to serve, oftentimes the most vulnerable parts of our community, right? And so I think it's high time we had major investment in the success of students in our community colleges, because we know there's huge obstacles in students' way in terms of finishing their degrees after they start. So props to the Pritzker Foundation, and, good luck to the many thousands of students who are going to hopefully benefit from this donation.
Indeed. All right, folks, that about does it for this episode of All of the Above. Definitely leave us a review if you enjoyed what you saw or what you listened to. All right, we'll see you later, folks.